So we're here to have this conversation today about Charging Forward, ACT's latest commercial electric vehicle study. And as we have wrapped up the study, as we're going through what we're terming our executive summary calls, which are the calls going over the results of the study, and as we're selling this study to those who did not participate, we're finding that we are getting some really great response from those study participants as well as from those who have purchased the study. So we thought it'd be a really good opportunity to dive into a little bit more how we went through this process, who, without naming names, the customer set for the study were, and how we went through the process to create such a well-constructed study that's getting such a great response. So Jim Meal, Principal Industry Analysis at ACT Research, I'm going to turn it over to you to get this process started and talk about what our customer makeup looked like for this study.
Thanks, Ian. We're very excited to release our Charging Forward study. Taking a look at alternative power for the commercial vehicle industry is really in the DNA of ACT Research, going all the way back to our initial work in natural gas almost 10 years ago. We renewed and redirected that work in 2018 with the first of our studies in the electrical vehicle space. It was well received by customers, really a thumbs up and really an endorsement, and it gave us the incentive to revisit that work 3 years down the road. And if anything, this is a more exciting product in large part because we had 29 charter customers for our work. And these customers are across the full spectrum of the commercial vehicle space, a number of different stakeholders among traditional OEMs, tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers, financial firms, fleet operators, leasing companies, and perhaps the most exciting of all, even though all of our customers get me excited, we had participation by some of the new OEM entrants. So our process takes in input and has conversations with these customers and reflects not only our own thinking, but also the benefit of the dialogue that we conduct with these customers who really helped our study along. Number one, first and foremost, it's North American oriented, that is to say US and Canada, in terms of the geographic coverage. Number two, covers the class 4 through 8 marketplace, 14 different market segments and 22 applications. The time horizon for the forecast is 20 years. So we think it covers a strategic oriented time horizon for those who see this market development organically over the course of a fairly long period of time. The deliverables include our extensive analysis, PowerPoint summary, and the Excel spreadsheets, and those findings. Our baseline finding is that electrification is going to be very real in North America over these 20 years. We see electrification grabbing upwards of 40% plus of the commercial vehicle space over that 20-year time horizon, and sales and production hitting the 300,000 plus mark in what is roughly a 750,000 available unit marketplace. So, that's our baseline finding. And for further details, we suggest prospects buy the report. For some additional perspective, what I'd like to do is turn to my colleague, Ann Rundle. Ann is, while she's new to ACT Research, relatively new, she's a longstanding veteran of the motor vehicle industry with particular expertise and a particularly interesting view of studies like our electrical vehicle study. So Ann, I'm going to pass the baton over to you for your insights and comments.
So thanks, Jim, and thanks, Ian, as well. You're right. I've come from a different perspective, having spent a lot of time at a major tier one supplier in auto and commercial vehicles, and then spent a good amount of time working for an OEM in automotive as well as commercial vehicles. And so I've been for a long time a buyer of these kind of studies, and I also did a stint myself as an independent consultant, so I would have been somebody who created a study. So I think what is interesting to me, and I think what sort of differentiated, and Jim, you talked about 29 participants, and to me the volume of participants is a good thing, because you've got a bunch of different data points, but just the breadth across the span, especially in this market. In commercial vehicles, electrification is still more in the infancy, as if you would compare to automotive. But we had all the major OEMs and people who are actually making and selling and delivering battery electric trucks. So it's not just people who have what we would say at my old company is a PowerPoint product, and you see a lot of companies that do that. You know, their input is interesting, but they're still on the what if and the dreamers. And we actually had people who were doing it, making it, guys who were the fleet guys who were using it. So yeah, we got real practical feedback instead of just some kind of a desk analysis of what's in different press releases. We actually got really good feedback. And I think that was especially particularly helpful on diving into our TCO model. And the TCO model, and I think that's the other thing that's key, is the way our forecast was developed. It is forecasted very much so on what drives the commercial vehicle market, total cost of ownership. And if I can get something that can get me a little bit better total cost of ownership, I'm going to buy that model versus this model. It's not a preference. It's not a political thing. It's not to be green just for the heck of it. It is actually, that's a better option. And ours was based very much, people talk about science-based. To me, it's like real facts-based. If that's science, that's science. And it would actually come out and say, wow, if you're in this particular segment of a class 6 or 7, or if you're in this particular segment in class 8, the TCO says you got to do it. And I think the other cool thing about it, and as you mentioned, I came onto ACT research as we were getting more into the tail end of it. Having these video conversations with guys and engineers who are working on it, and going back and forth, it was really cool. I mean, it was like as if we were sitting in a room with them, and you were all looking at a computer screen, except we were using a video and we're sharing it. And we're talking back and forth about, no, that's really where we're seeing, the energy usage. And this is what we're seeing as practical being able to package as a battery. And this is what we're getting back as feedback. That was huge. I mean, and you can remember, Jim, we would end some of those meetings and go, oh my God, these guys weren't just giving us some fluff and flipping through some slides about here's my future product and here's what I want. I mean, they were saying, no, here's what we're seeing. I mean, and they were really, I've seen it sometimes when I did consulting projects, but I had never seen it to the extent, and not just one or two companies that were really into it, but a lot of, from new entrants to guys who've been doing it for a long time. That was, to me, really fabulous. And I think that's why ours has that credibility of, the methodology is there and the credibility is there because of the relationships that ACT has with those established guys. And also because of that credibility, the new guys were like, hey, we got to talk to you. So I was hugely impressed.
Taking a step back and outlining some of the key aspects of our study. Number one, we embraced 14 different vehicle segments and 22 applications across those segments. So the building blocks of the study was to take a detailed look at different applications in the commercial vehicle space. That was number one. Our model is a detailed model, where in essence what we're doing is we're comparing traditional ICE power, that is to say, primarily diesel, comparing that against battery power, and also including fuel cells and hydrogen-powered vehicles too. We examine, based upon both our own informed opinions and the inputs that we get from the OEs, from the Tier 1 and Tier 2 suppliers, what the potential purchase price of those vehicles are. We rack them up against each other and cost them out on an upfront cost basis. And then we take a look at the vehicles in use and the cost for fuel, the cost for service, the cost for maintenance, and set up a financial comparison. And the financial comparison is really the critical thing that drives ultimately the comparative advantage, the increasing financial advantage over the course of time in most segments of the battery vehicle. And then we have a proprietary function that converts those estimates on payback period and overall project cost savings and translates those into market share. And once we have that market share, we apply that against the aggregate market potential forecast, GVW based, which is sort of our wheelhouse, our core business. And that's what enables us to come up with a forecast that we believe is A, credible, and B, reliable. Once again, trying to take a look at big picture, our process and our deliverable, I think the hallmarks of those are transparency and visibility. We turn this work over in total to the customer. So the customer can see the detail, examine the assumptions that rest behind the numbers, and because they are the owners of the model, once we turn them over, they can either compare them against their own modeling work if they have their own models, or use our models to do their own alternative scenario and what if kind of analysis. So that's why we think, A, it's pretty exciting because this work is vetted in detail by our customer set. And B, when you consider the deliverables, an extensive written analysis, a PowerPoint summary of the results, and the full spreadsheet array of our methodology, our forecast detail, and alternative cases, high end and low end. It's a pretty powerful package.
It's interesting just to add to that. And Ian, you can remember when I first came on board and I spent a little bit of time with Tim, who had created that model. And I'm like, wow, I think I said to you, this study is worth it just for the model alone, because there's companies and people that are, they're trying to do it, and it's just the time and effort and the knowledge base to build that model up and have it be really vetted and correct it's a big time saver. Plus you've got it's vetted and the expertise of it. And I think I think we're on Gen 3 of this model, because the model originally started in 2018 for that study. And over time we've improved it and perfected it and said, okay, here we, adding things like the federal excise tax, adding the considerations of insurance, things that are still actual tangible costs that not everybody thinks about. And so they don't realize that if you're changing your purchase price, it's going to change it, or things. The other thing that we added in, not just having the knowledge on the electrification side is, Jim had mentioned it, ACT is built 30 plus years on knowing the trucking industry and knowing and understanding the regulations and how they're changing for internal combustion engines. And the thing that we saw, and I think it was in 2024, CARB coming in with low NOx, and then in 2027, the federal government adopting those, and then in 31, another change in the regulations. And a lot of times what people do when they do a TCO model is they take this year and they say, let me just look at this year. I'm going to look at all my costs, acquisition costs, my operating costs. I'm going to blow it out against how many years in service and done. And they don't take the trouble to really go through. Ours is very detailed, 2020 all the way to 31 or 30, 31. And then we do banner years out in 35 and 40. But we look at how are those costs changing as those years go out. And I haven't seen a model that does that. Most of the models are really just, they're taking a snapshot today, they're blowing it against, maybe they're going to look at some improvements in energy density of batteries or costs. Everyone understands the battery costs going down, but not everybody really, factors in increases of cost of our legacy internal combustion engines. We did some TCO modeling at the OE where I was at, but nowhere near to the extensiveness in some cases that we've got, and Jim had mentioned, across all those applications. Because you're trying to just get sort of an overview, and you might say, well, let me take a couple of examples. And the thing that we found as we were going through is that these different applications have a different duty cycle. They're going to use a different battery. They're going to need a different size battery pack. They're going to need a different size motor. It's not going to be just one motor and one cost across all of them. And that is key. And also when we looked at pieces of equipment that would use auxiliary, a reefer, a construction equipment, a refuse truck. Oh, by the way, they're going to use an electric motor to do what used to have a hydraulics. That's going to have an energy draw. Now we have to put that in. So we looked at everything very, very methodically, and then tested it back against OEs who are like, are you seeing the same kind of an energy consumption on a refuse truck? Well, you might want to change it a little bit here or there. What are you looking at for a yard spotter? Oh, well, we look at it not in miles, but we look at it in, consumption per hour. Okay. Oh, you guys are using this different duty cycle. So we were, we have our knowledge of what we know from all those different segments that we look at, but it was, and a lot of the guys who really, and when I say guys, I mean androgynous, they had actually said, well, we're using your 2018 model when we bought your study, and now we've added to it and changed it. So that was, I think, such a fabulous validation that it was that. And I also think it's not a black box. Jim mentioned it's very transparent. And a lot of the models that people do, you do the inputs, and then you can see how it, and then here's the answer at the end. And ours is very transparent. So if you're saying, I don't want to use electricity cost of 10 cents. I think it's, per kilowatt, I think it's going to go to 12. Let me see the sensitivity. So you can we have sensitivity models for a fast case, not so fast case, but you can also do a lot of what ifs yourself. So you say, okay, let me look at this energy cost change. What if diesel changes to here? We added things in like the consumption of DEF, because on a diesel, it's not just the diesel gasoline, you're also using the, the urea. So you've got the SCR system. I think that the thoroughness of that was pretty impressive. And then on top of it, we also said, well, what if, California's coming out with the Advanced Clean Truck Act, and there's, a number of states that have indicated that they would follow with legislation. What about compliance? Does the economics still, will they meet what these required, percentages are, or will they have to be laying on top of it? And in some cases, in some applications, yes, there would be an incremental to meet that compliance. And that is key, because I'm telling you, from stuff I had seen before, and this is more on the automotive, but people they were like, well, we can't imagine what it would be like to try to do the compliance. So they weren't doing that. So I think ours has that, and we're very clear on what that incremental part is to lay on that compliance. So if you want to strip that out, I think the other thing that's key is that it's built purely on economics and not on subsidies. I've seen other models that throw in the subsidies. So if our users want to throw in a subsidy and take down a purchase price, net acquisition cost, that's fine. We don't do that. We have to say, is this going to grab? based on true economics, not on being propped up with subsidies. And I think you can see the changes that happened in China on the automotive side when they took away subsidies. It upended that market, and all of a sudden your market forecasts were not correct. And so ours are very conservative. We're not assuming subsidies. So, and I think that is also I think that's super, super key.
Ian, it's probably a good idea to cover some fundamentals of the study. There you go, Ian. Shameless marketing on the part of an economist.
No problem. We love shameless marketing. Hey, Ann, I'm going to come back to you on a question related to kind of the methodology and the process that we went through. And then, Jim, I'd like you to pick up the ball and talk about how we got to the point where we decided that this was the process that we were going to go through. Because I know, Ann, you had touched on the fact that you'd participated in multi-client studies in your past life, but you hadn't seen one that actually took the customer along for the ride to the degree that you had in this study. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, I think a lot of the studies that happen, and oftentimes it's multi-client because we want to get enough people to subscribe to it to justify to do the study. And then don't you worry, and we're going to tell you what the answer is at the end. And I think those ones that I've seen in my lifetime, the folly is that they're not coming back and saying, we're seeing this, what do you think? And not as if you want the clients to dictate what the answer is, okay? But you want to have that back and forth and that pushback. Because if you aren't testing out your theories and your hypothesis, you could start to go off in an area that is wrong because you didn't see one of the, you didn't see the nose in front of your face kind of a thing. And we found that in a couple of cases, in this where guys were saying, well, no, actually, this is really how we're using, this is how we're going to be using this type of application. And I think that was key for us, is that we did have that interaction with our clients. We didn't use our clients to tell us the answer. So sometimes people can think it could go the wrong way. It's like, well, why am I paying you to tell you so you can tell me back? No, not at all. That wasn't how we did it. I mean, we ended up having, our hypothesis, going back and saying, here's what we're seeing, and getting that pushback. And I think that was, that's what makes this study having such credibility. And I think the other thing is that, we had touch points along the way. So that whole process of kind of, having the first set of meetings, video conferences with the team, building up what it was, then coming back and saying, okay, here's what I heard, here's where we're at. And then even, and at first I was like, we're publishing a preliminary and then we're going to publish a final. How does that work? Usually you're kind of one and done. And I'm like, wow, that was the smartest thing we ever did, because we published that preliminary on the 12th of February. Our clients, who we were already back and forth with already, went through it, looked at it, and then we had follow-on meetings with those guys, and then said, okay, when they get to see the whole picture, like, yeah, but we think this or that. So we ended up, finding some things where we need to touch on. And I would say for the segment that I was particularly responsible for on batteries, I've been dealing with batteries for since 2007, so a long time. And I just want to mention I was really young then. But, to me, it was like, no big deal. Raw material, come on. There's more lithium in the world than we'll ever need. And we don't need, don't worry about nickel, don't worry about cobalt. And so many of our customers, and I think because I've been in automotive and commercial vehicle, they were like, but what about? Because they're new to this. And so we added that whole section. We said, you're right. Okay, no problem. We'll make sure you guys understand what's happening in raw material, and not just raw material, but the supply chain. So, people look at things and they look at a spot price for lithium carbonate and they all go, whoa. And No, we also talked about the supply chain. Here's the guys who are mining the lithium. Here's the guys who are processing the lithium. Here's the kind of long-term, agreements they have. Things like that I could also bring to the table because I was a supplier, so I knew, and I was an OEM, so I knew what was important. So I could say, forget a spot buy price. I'm not going to talk to you guys about that, but I'm going to talk to you about the fact that these guys are inking 10-year contracts for supply and pricing. So if there is, jiggles in the market, these, it's looked at. So there's probably a long way to say how that process helped us to, it's all voice of the customer. What's your customer asking for? What's important to them? What do they want to see? Oh, okay, we want to see raw materials. Great, we're going to add that. We had cases where we added segments as we went along in this study also, because they said, well, wait a minute, that reefer, application is kind of like this, but we really think you should do a different one to look at construction equipment. So as we went along, and that model added segments. Some other provider might say, it's close enough to this, don't bother. But we kept adding on work to ourselves to make that a better product. So I think that kind of answers the difference. It's so like they were in the boat with us, they weren't necessarily having to steer the boat or, trim the sails or do everything, but they were still on the boat with us and kind of saying, hey, the mark's over here, guys, so it was a team effort. And I think that's what made it better. Absolutely.
So Ian, I'll add a few comments. First of all, we benefit from the fact that we've been doing this kind of work for a long time. Again, going back to our natural gas work 10 years ago. One thing I think was valuable is that ACT has a stable team. So all the players that were part of our 2018 study were back for our 2021 study. And then we added on Anne with her valuable background. So the team was stronger than ever and had extensive experience, both in terms of historical work in alternative power and in consulting work that we've done over the last 3 years, in no small part because of the reputation that we gained out of our 2018 study. Our process is time intensive because we spend time with our customers. We actually do prepare that first draft for customer review. And it's one thing to talk about topics on batteries, topics on regulation, topics on infrastructure, but until it takes a tangible form in a report, granted a draft report, the customer and even the staff really has ideas that aren't in a fixed form taking real shape until the numbers are in the spreadsheet, the tables are in the PowerPoint, and the analysis is in the PDF. And then you have something you can really sink your teeth into. And it's time intensive not only for us, but also for our valued customers who gave us the time to work through that first initial draft and draw their red pens around things where they said, I don't know about this, maybe there's a different point of view. And that launched the second round of back and forth conversations and inquiries that led to the final product. So we think this process, while time intensive on the part of us and our charter customers, really gives a very robust end result that I think captures our best thinking and some of the best thinking going on in the leading edge players of the business.
So one of the items that we make available to our participants is an executive summary meeting. I guess my question is, we've walked through this process with them for almost 9 months. They've seen a preliminary, they've seen the final. We've had follow-up conversations along the way, not to mention the kickoff conversations, email correspondence. Why do you think our customers who participated in this are taking us up on these executive summary meetings and going through another step in the process with us. And what are some of the feedbacks? What is some of the feedback that they are providing to us through those calls?
They keep learning. And you know, prime example, yesterday we had one of those executive calls with a client that I participated in actually all of. So we had, you know, the initial call, we looked, then we went over TCO. We had another call, and this was our last call, but they actually said they want to have us back, you know, they want to. And one of the things was they were saying, well, you know, there's this hypothesis, well, we've heard this about da-da-da-da. You know, so right away, and it, you know, was it odd that it just so happened that I'd actually looked at that other particular company's claims the day before? No, because we're doing this all the time. You know, we're not just doing it for a report and we're not going to look at it again. We're looking at this stuff all the time and we're getting all sorts of inputs. We were able to go right back to those guys on their call and say, well, here's the reason why they're looking at this. You know, hydrogen is not $4 a kilogram. Hydrogen is $10 a kilogram. Here's how you're going to see this different of TCO. So those guys are coming back to us because they're dynamic. You know, they're still talking to investors. They're still talking to customers. And every time they can talk to us, because they know we keep moving the needle, they're going to learn something more. I mean, those guys, you could just sort of see that. Thanks for those two pieces of information, Ann, because now, yeah, we know why those guys are looking at seeing a different TCO, because, you know, they're lifting the scales up. I think every single one of these guys, and I know from having been a customer, I loved it every time those guys came in. And it would be like, great, we're going to learn more. And then even if you were the guy who bought the study or pushed for the study, you always brought in the skeptics who said, why do we bring these guys? Why are we spending this money? We know this already. And they'd learn, they'd go, whoa. And, you know, you'd ask a guy a question, they'd be like, yeah, because we were just at this and this conference, or we know this guy. You can't say the names. And you're like, okay, thank you. I learned so much more in that 1 hour than if I had been searching every single internet press release for hours and years, you know? So that's my I don't know, Jim, you've been doing this longer, so you've probably got a different perspective than me as the new guy.
Well, actually, it boils down to pretty much the same perspective, Ann, which is what it boils down to is the stakes are big. The stakes are big for our traditional customers, whether an OEM or a tier 1 or 2 supplier, because what's at work is the strategic direction of the marketplace with this literally revolutionary new technology that that they and we need to have a good understanding of. This is really, having been in the business in one form or another for 45 years, this is a paradigm shifting
huge
development. It's the big change in the business. So the commitment that we've made and the commitment that our customers have made to study this is part and parcel of the decisions that are going on in the boardrooms and by senior management groups in our client customers, and reflected in the rather extravagant Wall Street valuations that are being applied to new entry ventures in this field. There's a lot of time and a lot of money at stake, and that's going to command the attention of the players in the business.
So given that this is a continuous evolution and this process isn't going to slow down, and it is a paradigm shift, what's next for ACT research related to electrification, battery electric, fuel cell electric? What can our customers, what can our prospective customers intend to see coming out of our shop next?
Well, global, and that's the thing. So we're just launching now a global study, and that's one of the things. Most of my career I've been global, and I am old enough when things in the automotive and transportation were still somewhat regional, but that changed. You know, and that's gosh, maybe changed, well, quite a while back. And that's the thing, is that even if our trucks look a little different, you know, you can't line up class 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and we have different types of vehicles, but the technologies and the things that are changing, a battery pack cost dropping down is dropping down across the globe. You know, the 2170 or an NMC, those cells are the same in China as they are in Korea, as they are in Japan, as they are in the US, as they are in Europe, you know. And you have most everybody, the tier ones are global. Everyone has a global look on it. And we're the guys that know this stuff. We're the guys that know the markets, we know the technologies, we know what's important, we know the model, we know how to build and do that forecast. And we're partnering with NIB Gorbanzano and Partners, so KGBP, who have done quite a bit of expertise in looking at global powertrains. And so to me, that's the thing. That's the next question, is especially even if you're a guy who's today just in North America, you're going to want to understand, where else can I go? Because your competition is global. And so if there's changes and trends that are happening somewhere else in the globe, it's going to happen, and it's going to affect you here in North America, and vice versa, vice versa for the Europeans. So that, I think, is key. And also, I just, because we talk so much about our process, our methodology, our access to the individuals. All the OEs we talk to were global, right? So you look at that methodology and you say, how many guys asked us, when are you doing global? I mean, before we had actually finally made it a concrete, I mean, it was an idea, we got to do this. I think it was an easy decision to do that, and it's just the most logical transition as we go from, I don't know if the success is the right word to say, but the accomplishment of completing North America to go into global, and it just makes sense. I had a boss at Chrysler who used to talk about turn the crank, and nothing is never the same. But we do have just the knowledge and the regimen of a really great process to apply. So Jim, I've been rambling, so you. Well,
while we have a partnership in place with KGP, we're considering extending that to the KGB. They have unusual sources of information gathering and intelligence, and I'm sure that would help make our study a lot more robust.
Actually, we're not going to include Russia, so edit that one out.
Well, if we get the KGB, maybe we can. Just a moment of lighthearted humor, we can edit that out.
But the other thing is that maybe it's premature to mention this. That it would be edited out, but the next step is also autonomy.
Bolt it on,
and that's the thing, is that our seminar 65 is going to be focused on having some panel talking about autonomy, and it should be a no-brainer for us to and we've looked at some timelines already to just sort of slide right onto that, and I think that that makes sense. We're the guys, and I use guys androgynous. We're the guys, we're the people. We know this market, and we understand, and we know what is important to the guys who buy the trucks, the guys who make the trucks, the guys who lease the trucks. We know those people. And so we know, what, as they're saying, how should we react to, what's the next thing? We're the guys to help bring them and say, here's what's important, here's what's not important, here's where we see it. So it's not just forecasting how many Class 8 trucks are going to be built, but what's important to those Class 8 trucks. It's not just about a bottom line number. So and we're the guys who can do it and do it successfully.
It seems every 30 or 40 years there's a direction changing event that occurs. In the 1950s, I think in both North America and Europe, it was the build-up and the extension of the highway system that really laid the foundation for large-scale trucks and for trucking to be an important part of surface transportation. In the United States in the early 1980s, it was deregulation that had profound impacts on the structure of the truck transportation industry. And here we are 30 to 40 years later, right on the threshold of more exciting change, but also more change that really shapes the strategy of the stakeholders in the business, and could change who the winners and losers are in the next 10 to 20 years.
And and maybe I'm biased in this way because of my engineering background, but the technology is changing, and it's making it something that can happen when you look at, and it's not just the cost dropping on lithium-ion batteries, it is the energy density, it is the improvements. And you look at where the energy density was, even less than 10 years ago, it wouldn't have been viable. It wouldn't have been viable in a commercial electric vehicle. It would not. You'd have to have hauled a trailer of, battery cells. And now is, all those improvements that were being pushed, they're there. You've got the cost, you've got the energy density, you've got the technology, you've got the rapid charging, you've got all those things that made a battery electric, a no-go compared to a diesel. That just, you'd laugh at it, right? And now it's there. I mean, I wanted to be on the truck side of this electrification because I think that's going to be the change, because the TCO is clearly there. And truckers, they understand it. Yes, the truck price might be a little bit, it might be higher, an initial purchase price, but that's not what these guys are looking at. They're looking at a TCO. They're looking at a payback. It's a business. It's not, it's not my personal vehicle. So it's pretty cool.
Well, thank you both for helping us better understand what our objectives were and what we accomplished through the study, the feedback we're getting, as well as the process that we went through over this 9-month period, plus the work from 2017, 2018. So thanks for helping us dig into this. Great to know where we are and where we intend to go. So thank you again.
You bet. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for the conversation. Always good.